Hello everyone, Eric here at Fox Canada. Today we're talking about the model year 2021 DHX2 shock. This is very similar to the X2 version, but it's a coil shock. It's got a lot of really new features for 2021, quite exciting stuff. By now you've probably seen my previous video about the X2. A lot of the features will be similar, but we'll give a quick rundown on the shock, and then we'll dive into the technical aspect and visit all the new procedures, new tools, and point out the new changes. The new DHX has an improved high-speed rebound with a new variable valve control called VVC. Because of this, we've had to reposition our high-speed rebound to the bottom eyelet. On your top eyelet, you're going to have your low-speed rebound in red. You have your high-speed and low-speed compression in blue. You also have an independent circuit for the firm mode, and you're also going to have a firmer lockout than previous year models. We also have a new detent for the collar. So when you're setting your spring up, you have a click every 1/8 of a turn. Very nice feature when you're setting it up. It helps set up the preload of your spring, and it will also help maintain that while riding. We have a new steel outer body on the shock and a new MCU bottom out bumper. We also have a reduced resi length, and this is going to help fit the shock on more new frame designs. Lastly, we have a new shaft finish, as well as a new piston, which will help reduce harshness and improve quality of ride control. For the first step, we're going to start by removing the coil on our new shock. To do this, you unwind the new threaded collar. As you can see, there's these grooves, and that detent ball that I was talking about earlier sits in there. So each time you do a little turn here, you feel it go click, click, click. Pretty clean feature. So we're going to go ahead and loosen this all the way, giving ourselves lots of room to remove the coil. And the way to remove it is a little new for this year. So in previous year models, you'd release a preload on your coil and slide this ring out. Now this year, you can't really do that. It's a bit different. So you have a C-clip in place, and you now simply pop that out. And again, I'm using my old shim trick here. Oop. You could kind of pop it out with your thumbnail as well. So there you go. Yep. This comes out. So does this. And now your coil is removed. All right, so now that we have the coil removed, we're going to talk about travel changes. A lot of the features that you're going to see on this DHX2 shock are very similar to the X2, so we might cruise through some of the steps a little quicker and reference the X2 video for those steps. But for the travel change, in my opinion, this is a very quick, easier than on the X2 air shock, because you remove the coil like you just saw, and you have access to your travel spacers. This particular shock is a 185 by 50 millimeter. You can easily convert it to 185 by 52.5 or 185 by 55. Same procedure. You take your Allen key, remove your little Allen bolts, and so you lift your little washer plate, and here you have your 4 travel spacers, 1 on each side. All right, so now that we have the coil removed here, we're going to talk about the travel spacers. A lot of the features that you're going to see on this DHX are very similar to the X2 that we previously showed you. So I'm going to make a lot of references to that video, and I might even skip some steps and procedures on this particular one, and point you and refer you to that video because they are very similar. For the travel spacers, on this particular shock, it's a little bit easier than on the X2 because you don't have to remove the air sleeve. So very similar to the X2, you don't have to access the hydraulics. You have two spacers over here, 2.5 millimeters each. This shock is a 185 by 50. You can remove one layer of spacers and make it 185 by 52.5, or you can remove both of them and make it 185 by 55. So very similar to the X2. You remove your hardware. And you can lift your little washer plate here and remove the travel spacers. Now it's important to identify the hardware because you are going to have size specific hardware depending on the amount of travel spacers you're running. You can source this on the tech site. There's a chart in the parts listings showing what hardware length you should be running for the amount of spacers you're configured with. Okay, so we're gonna use our Schrader valve core tool and remove the anti-tamper IFP plug. Same little device as the X2 that we've seen. And using the new IFP fill tool, you could thread that into the piggyback to release the IFP charge. Very important to release that before going into the shock. There you go. That is done. Now you can press down on this a little bit. There you go. Remove the retaining clip, and using a small Allen key, you can go ahead and remove your IFP cap. So now that we know there's no pressure in the IFP, we can remove the bleed screw and remove the oil from the shock here by cycling it a few times. There you go. And now that we've removed the IFP pressure from our piggyback reservoir, you can take your Nipex pliers and crack that main bearing and unthread this. Now I just use a rag here because there might be a bit of oil spillage, and gently wiggle your shaft and your bearing assembly out, just like that. And you can now pour the oil out into your oil reservoir. So this shock, the DHX2 for 2021, uses the new Fox 4-weight oil, same as in the X2 shock. So that's a new oil for the Fox lineup this year. So next, you can use your IFP tool and slide it in, turn it 90 degrees, and wiggle out your IFP. There you go. So again, just like the X2, a nice fitment here to pull that out. So in a regular service, you'd go ahead and replace the seals on your IFP and put that back in when you're done with it. Okay, so for today on this particular shock, we're not going to go into more detail. If you need or have questions on servicing the eyelet, you can refer to the X2 video. We have it chaptered to the eyelet service section where you can remove the compression, the rebound controls. You can remove the resi, the climb switch, and the body, and fully service it. The service instructions don't recommend going any further than this unless you have issues with any of these specific areas. But if you're just doing your service, you could essentially replace the seal in the IFP and then start reassembling. So now here we have our shaft, our bearing, our VVC, our eyelet. So we will clamp our shaft over here and dive into some of this stuff over here. So by using a 19 mil socket, we can go ahead, crack this loose. And there you go. There's the VVC assembly with our shim stack, compression, our piston, and our rebound tune. Again, for full VVC service procedures, you can refer to our X2 video. The VVC segment will be clearly indicated. You can fast forward right to it. It's also important to know that the VVC in a regular service, you don't have to recalibrate it using the fixture tool. It's only when you change a tune, because that's going to affect your height of the shim stack. And by doing so, you're going to need to recalibrate your VVC device. Without changing the tune, you're good to remove your shim stack and clean everything up, put it back together, and you don't need to recalibrate it. Next is our bearing assembly. So a couple seals to replace here during a regular service. All the seals are included in your seal kit. We have this little blue one. We have a few in here, one right over here. So very important, replace those. You have the plate for your travel spacers and your new bottom out bumper. So now we're going to go ahead and remove our shaft eyelet, and to do so there's some red Loctite on the shaft, so we're just going to apply a bit of heat to help loosen that up. And there you go. Now by using our Nipex pliers, we can go ahead and break that loose. So there is our eyelet with our rebound knob. We'll go into that in a second. here we have our rebound rod in our shaft. You could push this out. And there's your rebound rod. And there is our shaft. Over here, you can use your Park precision screwdriver and just remove this little cap on the eyelet by simply prying it off like that. And now you have access in here to removing your rebound control, and you have a little detent ball right in there as well. So if ever your rebound clicks don't feel so clicky, you can replace that little ball right in there. And so there you go. That is about as deep as we're going to go with the teardown for the DHX2 today. If you want to see the VVC assembly or the eyelet service, you can do so by fast forwarding to the X2 video. There's a link in the description below. Feel free to go to those sections in the X2 video to see full details. If you want, you can also view it on the ridefox.com tech site. There's detailed instructions with high-res images. Feel free to resort to those if needed. So we're going to start the reassembly process. For today, we're going to reassemble this one dry. So a dry reassembly means no oil, but I'm going to show you the steps how to do it without bleeding the shock in this particular instance. Okay, so we're going to start by clamping the shaft into our soft jaws, into our clamps, taking the rebound rod and putting a bit of slick oleum on there because we're going to slide it onto the bottom here and use our pick to just push it up a little bit. I find the slick helps keep it in place, just like that right there. Without the slick, sometimes it'll just fall back out again. So once that's in place, we can take the little cap from the eyelet, take our eyelet and our rebound control and thread this back on. There you go. And pop this guy back into place. For proper torque settings, please refer to the tech website. So once you have that in place, you can take your torque wrench and torque it to 16.9 Newton meters. There you go. Now you can go ahead and spin your shaft around. Apply your bottom out bumper, your little travel spacer plate with the laser engraving bottom down, your bearing assembly, and lastly your shim stack and VVC rebound assembly. And so you can go ahead and thread all this into place here. Okay, then using your 19 mil socket, you can go ahead and torque this down to 9 Newton meters. Now you can go ahead and take your fancy orange IFP, set this back into place, Reinstall your C-clip if you're going to do a bleed. In this case, we're just doing a dry assembly, so we can go ahead and put the top cap in place and put your retaining ring and snap it in like that. For the proper bleed instructions, you can refer to the X2 video. We use a vacuum pump in-house over here. We fast forward through the process. The proper hand bleed instructions and bleeding instructions can also be found on the Ride Fox Tech page. We can now take our shaft and bearing assembly and slide this back into place and thread this into the body. There you go. Now is a great time to reapply your desired travel spacers. So there's 2.5 mils of spacers in place. We're going to go ahead and put another layer, totaling 5 millimeters. And thread those two little Allen bolts in place. Nice and snug. Using that same little Allen key, you can pull this out. After inflating the IFP chamber, take your Schrader valve tool, thread your anti-tamper plug back in place, and then lastly you would put your coil back on, your retainer, and the retainer ring slides over, clips into place. So there you go. We've skipped the bleed process here. Obviously it's a dry rebuild, but you've seen the steps for the reassembly. And again, there's the tech site and the X2 videos for the VVC and the eyelet procedures that we did not cover today. Okay everyone, thanks for listening to the model year 2021 DHX2 rebuild. This is the last video of our 2021 series. So far we've covered the 38, the transfer post, the Float X2 and the DHX2. Hopefully everyone's learned something. It's a big model year for Fox this year, a lot of exciting product, really exciting stuff for the techs who are working on it, and obviously very exciting for the riders who are riding the new 2021 product. So cheers, thanks for listening.